So welcome to today's deep dive session, social system mapping deep dive session for March 15th, 2021. As usual, your hosts today are me and Kara. As you all, I think, know, we have 3 community practice sessions a month on the first Monday, or second, third, and fourth Mondays of the month. Today, we're going to be talking about survey development for social system mapping. Next Monday, we'll be talking about transitioning to the new sumApp survey interface, and the following second Monday out in April, David Ehrlichman is going to share his Ignite Philanthropy map. So that should be interesting. I haven't seen that yet. Kara will be putting links to all of our various resources for learning more in the chat. There's a number of options for you, both Slack kinds of options and other kinds of online options. There's also recordings of all our sessions for the last year and a half. So that's gotten to be kind of a rich library. And you can also join me. I devote a half an hour a week to just being online and available for people if they have questions. So feel free to come and join me in that every Thursday from 5 to 5:30 Central. And I do occasionally cancel, and I say that in Slack. So go look there if it matters. So let's get started with just getting to know a little bit about each other. In the chat, if you could put your name, your pronoun, and your location. And also just while you're doing that, know that whatever links Kara puts into the chat, we will also include in a follow-up email. So if you're not in a mood to grab all those links right now, feel free to ignore them. But if you would like them now, you can. So, Rebecca joined us. Hi, I didn't see you come in. Christy's with us. Jim's with us. You're all sort of hidden below my thing in Slack. And Reiner, who we have missed, and Hannah from Brazil and living in Spain. Great. This is all fun to see all the people from all over the world that join us. Next, what is one wicked problem that you're trying to address with a network approach? So I assume everybody comes here because they work with networks or they have challenges that they want to solve that they understand require networks. And fun. There's a lot of people here with us today. Environmental literacy, very important. Paradigm change. Mary, you're right up there with me. Like, let's just change everything. Well, or change the profundity of everything, which is the hardest one, but we know it's the most leverage. And as you're done, you can go ahead and look at each other's. I won't read them all out loud, but so and then the last question I want to have in the chat is just to put in, what are the systems involved with your wicked problem? So we understand that all of our wicked problems are problems of systems and required systems change, but what are those actual systems that we're talking about for you? So education system, culture system, healthcare system. A lot, yes, all the systems are massively entangled. which is part of the challenge. They all feed into each other. We're going to talk about that really briefly. Racism and the ecology and food systems. Power games. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, I'm going to move forward while you finish that up. So for today's agenda, well, today I'm going to talk a little bit less about explicit survey development and more about the ways that I feel like we need to start to think about survey development. So before we're developing the survey, what are the mindsets that we could be attending to? And what kinds of conversations do we need to have with our networks as we develop our surveys to help them become increasingly meaningful? So I'm going to start by sharing some rather high level and abstract stuff pretty quickly. I know most of you are already fairly much systems thinkers, or some of this will be really familiar to a lot of you, but it's going to be like a really flyover kind of an intro, just to help ground us to. And if you're not familiar with it, don't worry. You don't have to remember any of it. It's not going to impact your engagement later. I'm just trying to sort of set the context for thinking about survey development. So I'm going to talk about the network horizon, complex adaptive systems and a theory of change, the CDE model, and having done all that really quickly, I'm going to, then we're going to do some shared thinking about survey development using Mentimeter and breakouts. So yeah, that's a lot of stuff, which I'm going to whip through. So I recently was in a workshop with Valdez Krebs, who was sort of June Holly's, a colleague of June Holly's and maybe an advisor of hers as she was sort of generating her network weaver approach back in the day. And he used this word, which was the network horizon, which when he used it, it's just like all of a sudden all these light bulbs went off in my head. And you wouldn't think that would be the case since I've been working with networks as long as I have been working with network mapping. But it was a perfect way of describing, just in that word, it implicitly sort of describes a problem that we have with social system mapping that I run into all the time, and I'm sure you guys have as well. So I'm going to go to, where did that go? Yeah. So just, I do this thing to myself all the time. I try to condense so much into so few words that I jam everything up, and then I'm tongue-tied. I wrote a blog piece a few years ago, and Kara, I think you have a link to it and you can put it in the chat, about the difference between ecosystems and egosystems. And the difference, it was to call out the distinction between networking and network weaving. So I know a number of you read that, and I'm just sort of going back to that in reflecting more deeply on this concept of network horizon. So this is the Human Systems Dynamics Practitioners Social System Map. This pink dot here is me on the map. And if I hover over it, it highlights the network of people that I have a one-to-one direct relationship with within the context of that network. So this actually is one way of thinking about this, not that. Well, this is me, so this is where my ego lives. And this is my ego network. That's a network of which I'm the middle of, and it's the network around me. So this is what I realized when I saw that word, the network horizon. I realized, oh, the network horizon is actually basically the definition of the boundary between my ego network and any eco networks around me that are trying to generate and turn into ecosystems, human ecosystems. So in the thing that I'm always running into is people will say things like, oh, we don't need a map. We know who our network is. Or well, they'll have a map and then they'll say, well, what do we do with it? What is it going to do for me? As if the whole purpose of the map is for us to just sort of keep networking and just keep growing our ecosystem or our ego networks bigger and bigger. And what I realized when I saw that phrase was that we have never, as human beings, had the capacity to see beyond our network horizon. So we think we see all there is to see. We've never had the ability to look. So, you know, for instance, within this network, I either can see it like this, or I can see it like that. You know, like we put 1,000 people in a room, I see, oh, there's a whole lot of people. I have no idea how they fit together. I have no idea what they're about, what they're working on, what influence they have, what power they exert, how they exert their power, how they're connected to anybody. I cannot see that. And we have never had the ability to see that before until just the last, you know, roughly decade or so. And for the most part, you know, until 5 years ago, that capacity was mostly in a static picture that some experts presented to you. So for us as community members to be able to actually see beyond our network horizon is not a thing we have a mental capacity for. It's not a thing that we feel like we need. We don't miss it. We're not longing to see that. Generally, there are probably a few of us who deep in our hearts have missed it because, and that's why we're here. But in general, it's like, you know, the thing about when you see something you've never seen before, like stories about not even be like, it's just invisible to you. You just don't get it. And when I realized, okay, that network horizon, people don't even have the concept of it, let alone know how to see it. They believe that their relationship to their ego network is actually knowing the overall network. And I realized, okay, well, no wonder it's so hard to have these conversations. Like may seem really obvious, but there was a way a light bulb went on in my head with that. So just wanted to, so that network horizon is a word I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot more from me in the future, because it was like a description of a boundary that I think is not only a boundary in it's like a boundary that we are conceptually, that's part of our paradigm shift, is to be able to think beyond that boundary and have some sense of what's actually beyond it. So the thing that I realized we need to start to do is to call out the relationship between seeing beyond the network horizon and system change. Because when you present a group of people with a social system map and you say, essentially, this is what's beyond your network horizon, they essentially say, so what? Or they might see it as, oh, okay, I can use this to build my ego network, to add some more useful people to my set of relationships. But what happens much less frequently is they say, oh, this is a picture of how we can start to implement system change. Oh, this helps me understand how to accomplish those larger goals not in a, you know, transactional, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, and we're going to do that because we're both aiming for the same goal, but more in a deeper way of understanding system change. So one thing we've learned is that systems change through eco networks, not ego networks, not projects, not organizations, but human ecosystems. We know that human ecosystems or human ecosystems or eco networks are complex adaptive systems. That's a scientific term, that's an abstract term, but we'll get into that really briefly. And what that means to be a complex adaptive system is that they have the capacity to self-organize. And so it's that capacity for self-organizing, for spreading agency and greater effectiveness throughout a network that we're really ultimately trying to get at with social system mapping. And that is the ultimate purpose, or purpose, I think, of being able to see beyond our own network horizons is to give us greater impact into creating and nurturing our complex adaptive systems so that all beings thrive. So we get rid of change the destructive systems that we're dealing with now. So the more we understand complex adaptive systems, the more intentional and effective and wise we can be in our system change efforts and in our eco network development. And so now that we have this new ability to see what we weren't ever able to see before, and we also now have a clear understanding that it's at the ecosystem level that we can impact change, what we need to understand is how this new ability to see can help us understand and impact the complex adaptive systems that we're trying to change. So this is me sort of feeling like I'm beginning to be able to make the case for social system mapping and for its relevance to system change. I mean, I feel like I've been doing this for 7-8 years now, and people ask all the time, and I have just stuttered and been rather inarticulate because it's been an intuitive thing, and now it's starting to be a cognitive thing. And that's what I'm sharing. So, okay, so how did everything I just say, how is that relevant for networks and for social system mapping? So this comes from Human Systems Dynamics, Glenda Ouyang, and which I just am finding to be a more and more useful set of tools for understanding complex adaptive systems. And so this is basically how a complex adaptive system works, which is agents. There's a bunch of agents and they interact. And as they interact, their interactions start to generate patterns. And those patterns then grow and amplify, and then they become system-wide patterns. And then those system-wide patterns themselves interact to influence the future actions of the agents in the system. So pretty soon you have this self-reinforcing feedback loop. And it kind of, the deeper those patterns, the less it seems like the agents within the system have the ability to change those patterns. So for like this, for instance, systemic racism, it might be that, it just hypothetically 95% of Americans really wish we could have a racially equitable world in America, but the patterns are so deep and so unconscious and so old that they just keep reinforcing. And so they just keep making this feedback loop. So that's how complex adaptive systems then become self-organizing and sort of have a life of their own. So in Human Systems Dynamics, we talk about the CDE model. So these are the conditions that generate a self-organizing system. And so and they influence how it changes. So once you understand, so there's containers, which I'll talk about in a second, differences, and exchanges. So if you don't have all three of those things, if you don't have something to hold the system together, and you don't have differences, which create the energy and the tension within the system, and you don't have exchanges, you're not going to have a complex adaptive system. So the HSD theory of change is that there's this business about patterns and reinforcing that the patterns reinforce the actions of the agents, and then the agents sort of reinforce the patterns. And if you want to shift that, you have to sort of step outside of the patterns and do this, what we call adaptive action loop, which is where we look at the patterns without interpreting them, without deciding what to do about them, without fixing them yet, but just looking at them to understand them more clearly. And then we start to do some interpretation or some analysis or so what does that mean? What might be going on that's under the surface? So this is like the iceberg diagram or picture that you see, that most of what generates a system is below the surface. So the what is just what's there, what can we see, and then the so what is sort of about what does that imply about what's the below the surface, and then now what. So that if you actually engage with the patterns with some intentionality, engage with the agents with some intentionality, you can start to shift the patterns, and then those patterns start to shift the system, and then that becomes a feedback loop that can shift the way the system works. So that's the first, the sort of the beginning part of the theory of change. And then, but given that and one of the things about ecosystems or ego networks is that they're usually homogeneous. They're usually homophilic, which means liking, preferring like. And so they can easily become echo chambers. So they're easily just reinforcing the same set of beliefs. So then this group is all reinforcing one set, and this group is all reinforcing a different set, and they just get more and more conflictual, and that just adds more and more conflict to the patterns. So one of the things that we need to do when we're doing our what, our so what, and our now what cycles is have tools that help us think differently, that help us look at the problems or the what's from angles that aren't our own normal habitual perspective, so that we can get out of our own echo chambers and start to think about it from another perspective, because without getting out of our perspectives, all we're going to do is keep reinforcing our part of it. So there's one more thing I wanted to say about that. Oh, and the other thing about the what, so what, now what that is becoming more clear to me recently is how one of the parts of the process is that you're slowing down your reaction, so that you're observing, and then you're pausing from observing a problem to then assessing the problem and thinking about the problem from different angles, and then solving, taking an action to solve a problem. So you're breaking those three pieces down so that you can be more intentional. But the other piece of it is that in a complex adaptive system, any change to any piece of it ripples out and changes other pieces of it. So if you try to have like, a 5-year project plan or a 10-step project plan, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, and then we're going to do another, and then we're going to do another. In a complex adaptive system, you can't be sure what's going to happen if you do. So if you do A, it might go this way, it might go that way. We don't really know. And so we take a small step that we can get quick feedback on, and then we assess again, and we say, what did that do? Do we want to do more of that? Do we want to do less of that? Do we want to do something? We want to try something different. And so the adaptive action loop ideally is a sort of an ongoing, really short, really small, really safe to fail experiments in nudging a system this way or that way, and then reassessing. So we're not talking about spending a year with what, and a year with so what, and a year with, we're talking about, on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis, on a meeting-to-meeting basis, whatever, sort of doing this, looking, evaluating, deciding, acting, reviewing the whole thing. But like I was saying, in this cycle of what, so what, now what, we all have our preferred ways of thinking of things, our own mental models. And so in HSD, we use what they call mid-level abstractions, but these are basically just really simple, really applicable ways of examining this. So this whole complex, this little picture is really high level, is really abstract, doesn't mean anything to anybody. It's hard to sink into. So we use the various models and methods to make it more applicable to everyday people and to dig into it. And so one thing that both HSD and I have been sort of, well, Glenda and the leaders in HSD, and Lisa Negstad, who's a friend of mine, who's a HSD practitioner, have been realizing is that social system mapping is one of those pattern logic tools. So these are Glenda's tools, and this is social system map tools. And all of these are very useful for informing, for finding what's, informing so what's, and thinking about how to shift our patterns. So that's how we connect up the social system map to the complex adaptive system. And this what, so what, now what cycle is something that ideally, if we're really active in a network that we're really trying to help become a self-organizing ecosystem, we would be referring to our social system maps regularly, and we'd be updating them as we begin to think about what do we need to see in that map now that we have this capacity to see beyond the network horizon. Okay, let me see if that's, okay. So back to the CDE model. We're gonna Kara, let's put the Mentimeter voting link into the chat. We're gonna think about containers, differences, and exchanges in a minute. Thank you, Jim. Yeah. Sorry, I sort of zoom into the chat for just a second, and then I make one or two lame comments, and then I go back to my get distracted again. But okay, so I'm going to talk about the containers, the differences, and exchanges for just a moment, or I'm going to talk about each one individually. But let's go ahead and have you click on that link that Kara's putting there. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so I can see all your faces, and if everybody, so let me know, put up either do the hand up icon or put your hand up if you've gotten into Mentimeter and are good to go. Okay. Looks like pretty much, yay. Okay, so we'll get there in a second. I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. So the CDE model, first of all, you need a container. I already said this, you need differences and you need exchanges, but what is a container? So a container is any bounding condition. So you can think of containers as like the fences around your system, or the magnet and magnets within your system that draw people to it, or affinities like similarities that make us feel comfortable and more inclined to come closer together. Examples of a container are individuals. In the HSD network, Glenda is a container. She's a magnet and she knows everybody. So individuals or groups, subgroups within the system, values, perspectives. So let's say, it's a hospital system. Nurses are going to be one container. Doctors are going to be another container. The maintenance people are going to be a different, orderlies, admin, et cetera, because they have a different perspective on the system. Goals can be containers, such as, we want to end homelessness, so that pulls us all together, or we want to create healthier, more cultures of health, that holds us together. Physical locations can be containers, such as neighborhoods or office buildings or churches. Containers can be permeable or impermeable. They can be obvious or they can be invisible. They can be social, physical, emotional, musical, and there are always multiple containers, and those containers are massively entangled. So there's a lot of, this is very fuzzy, but just to begin to think about containers, when we're looking at the health of an ecosystem, one of the things we want to do is look at what are the containers. Are they too tight? Are they too loose? Jim and I have this sort of ongoing conversation about permeable boundaries in some of the containers that we exist together in, and it's a generative difference because it over time shifts our thinking. But that discussion that we're having about should this boundary be more permeable or less permeable, whatever we decide is going to have an impact on the system. And so we want to think about that. What impact might it have? And so that's one of the leverage points that we can have is understanding our containers and trying to adjust them. So let's go to our Mentimeter. What did I do? Yeah. So if you go to Mentimeter, and I'm going to put up, hang on a second. Am I sharing my screen? I think I am. Okay, great. You guys have jumped in. Yeah, and so the one thing I wanted to think about what containers was to also think about the containers that you need to be clear about, or that pull you into to make your network experience valuable. And in a minute, we're going to go to containers. I'll shut up. Okay. Yeah, so clearly we'll get it. All of those are important. So I'm going to go to the next page now, which is, these were containers about your needs. So for within your network horizon, within your ego network, what matters to you? But then we also have within your, what would a network, someone whose role or whose intention is beyond the network horizon, is to create a healthy network, a resilient network, an adaptive network that works for everyone. So they're thinking beyond their own network horizon, but into the broader ecosystem. What containers would they be thinking about? Wow. This is really, yeah. You guys are coming up with stuff I have not thought of, or at least not explicitly in the context of containers, that is really useful. Okay, so let's go back to, you can keep putting stuff in a minute, or while I go to this next slide. So we just talked about containers. That's the C of the CDE. And then the D is differences. And differences are what gives meaning to a network. They're what holds energy, and they're what they exist inside of containers. So there's differences inside of all the different containers. And differences are the sites of turbulence, and they're powerful engines for change. So if you have a container and you have a monoculture, you do not have a complex adaptive system, and you require constant external inputs to keep that whatever's in there functioning and growing, or like you just need to keep putting all your fertilizers and pesticides and stuff on a cornfield that has never been turned over, and all the other fun stuff that needs to happen in a more generative kind of agricultural system. So those differences are what makes the whole thing possible. So differences are distinctions across parts of the system, and they can include things like interests or assets or experience and networks in our kind of context, culture, learning styles, roles, formal and informal power. Differences can be, there can be one major difference, or there can be multiple differences within containers, and differences might be obvious, In other words, they're up and everybody knows them and they're grappling with the tension around it, or they can be invisible and they can be doing sneaky things to the patterns that are going on without everybody entirely being conscious of it or aware of it. So let's go back to Mentimeter and go. I want to go. It won't go for me. Okay, there. Yeah. So let's first put in the differences that are significant and important for you. Like what differences do you need to see in a network to make your experience and network valuable? And what differences do you cultivate within your own ego network? Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide. You can continue in this slide until you're done and then choose to move to the next one. So don't, you shouldn't be jerked out of this one if you're not done, but I'm going to move to the next one. And if I can figure out how to make that happen. Okay. And so from the perspective of a network guardian or a network weaver, what differences might they be thinking about from that broader ecosystem perspective? Yeah, this is great. We'll all have access to this after it's done, so I think this will be valuable. Okay, again, you can continue. I'm going to go back to the slide deck for a moment and talk about, oops, we did that, exchanges. So exchanges are the lifeblood of any complex adaptive system, and it's certainly the lifeblood of human systems. So we might have a container, we might have differences in that container, but if nothing is flowing across the differences and across the subcontainers, we don't have life. We don't have a complex adaptive system. So exchanges can be the flow in systems thinking, it's the flows that are happening in the human system, a transfer of energy or resources or information, such as funding, friendship, skills, trust, bartering, collaboration, relationship, language, connection, I would say love. And so exchanges can be very focused, like if it's funding, you know, we're gonna, this node, you know, dumps $1 million into the bank account of that node. So that's a really focused exchange, or it can be very noisy. Well, it can be, I'm saying this wrong. I just described, so it can be very narrow or it can be very broad. So that node could also, you know, deposit, you know, $1,000 into, can't do the math at the moment, but into a whole bunch of nodes. So that would be a broad exchange. They can be focused or noisy. So in other words, they can be around a very the exchange can be very targeted around like just a single dynamic, or they can have lots of dynamics. So for instance, there are people on this call with whom I have noisy exchanges because we have a lot going on between us. We have shared work, we have friendship, we have love, we have conflict, we have etc. So in exchanges, as you're understanding your exchanges in your complex adaptive system, and as you're thinking about the patterns that exist and that you want to shift for the health of the system or to impact the broader system, you can amplify exchanges or you can dampen exchanges. And if, depending on the nature, if it's a conflictual exchange, you might want to dampen it as opposed to amplify it, or depending on the context, it might be the perfect time to amplify it. So understanding all these three things, containers, differences, and exchanges, and thinking about how they all fit together and are impacting each other is what feeds our adaptive action cycle and gives us the insight to figure out what small, little, safe to fail next step to experiment with, and then to look and see how it impacted everything. So let's go back to the Mentimeter and why is my thing not okay? And think about the exchanges that you need in your network experience to make it valuable. Pick reminders. Yep. Okay, and then I'm going to go to the next one. Again, you can continue in that one, but then what exchanges might the network guardian be thinking about? What exchanges might be important for them to be able to see and understand? Okay, I'm going to leave that open so you can, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And I have to say, I spent all weekend, I had these insights that I wanted to deal with in this session. And I knew it was not going to be like, it's only an hour. We have all this stuff to do. I wanted to make sure that that you guys had some time to talk, to have some breakouts and exchanges with each other. And I spent all weekend trying to figure out how to fit all of this stuff into this little teeny time frame. And so we actually have some time to do breakouts, which I'm really glad about. And I appreciate your sticking with me in all of this. And because there is something like new coming that sharing it with other people helps it get more clear. So I appreciate that. And I was thinking, okay, so let's see, we have more people here than I was anticipating. So what I wanted to do was have breakout rooms where we have 2 or 3 people in a breakout room, and we have one person who is in each breakout room who has been at this for a while and for whom this is a really not an overwhelming, confusing topic. I don't know, maybe that's assuming too much, but I'm assuming that it's not overwhelming for any of you because I'm assuming you're all brilliant. And I'm assuming this has kind of been in your guts anyway for a long time. But just in thinking about breakout rooms, I was going to have Kara like pick the most familiar faces and make a room, and then put the least familiar faces into those rooms. And let's do this. Let's say who feels really comfortable and wants to call themselves an experienced person in this context. So Kara, make a room for Jim. Oh, come on, folks. You can unmute yourselves too. It's too quiet.
Not just because I'm the oldest.
I don't think you are. Okay, I'm going to say make a room for Jim, make a room for Ryan, make a room for Mary, make a room for Christy. How you doing, Kara? Okay, let's make a room for Narayan. And let's just do, you can all see when you, Kara will open the rooms, and when she opens the rooms, go to one of those rooms based on if you really want to talk to that person, and or if they only have no more than one other person in the room. So self-organized to rooms of no more than 2 or 3. And and so then what we're going to do in there is, 1 second. I'm going to just have you discuss how this framing that I just shared with you might inform the development of your own survey, and how might this framing inform collective sense making that you can do with your map. And lastly, oh yeah, sorry, I have to get would it be helpful to see the Mentimeter content in this, for this discussion? I'm gonna put it in there. Give me 1 second.
If you can put the prompts in the chat again, that would be great.
Kara, can you do that from the slide? Do you have the slide? I'm assuming she said yes, but if she didn't, I'll get to it in a second. Okay, so Brian, I have to say, that is a really long, if somebody would check that link, the Mentimeter PDF link I just put up, and tell me if it works. Thank you, Ryan. Brian, this has been stuff that all of this is stuff I have been exposed to for years. And it has only been in the last, because I'm now getting certified to be a HSD practitioner. And so getting exposed to it over and over and over several times a week, and having to do exercises with it, and having to apply it to my own thinking, such as I applied it to today's session, so it takes a long time to sink in, is all I'm saying, is for everybody. And it's a lifelong learning. So that has nothing to do with how brilliant you are, in other words. Okay, so, oh, Kara, do we have no, hang on. In the thing. One and two is and we will, I'm sorry, I was hoping to give you more time. We'll do, let's say 6 minutes. Kara, do you have that? You're muted. Okay. Let's go. Oh, last thing, if you don't want to do a breakout, you can just stay here with me and Kara. You don't feel like you have to go and be intimate with someone you don't know yet, and you're not ready to have this conversation. So just feel free to say no. We'll be happy to chat with you here. Have fun. Cindy can't get in. Who are you? Kara, can you assign her, or is that anybody else trying and not succeeding to get into a breakout room, or is everybody else just like, I just want to sit here and not be bothered? Okay, good. Anyone else trying to get in somewhere and can't? Raise your hand. Derek. Oh, Ollie. Okay, we're not assigning you. There should be a little thing where you can pick a room, no more than 2 people already in it. Have fun.
Gotcha. Okay, my bad.
No. It's Derek. What about you?
I'm still, so I can open up the breakout rooms, but I can't figure out what to click to get in.
Kara, can you assign him somewhere?
Can you put me with Christy Gabbard?
Hannah and Erica, are you good here with us? Or do you want to go somewhere?
No, I'm good here. Thank
Okay.
you.
Good here as well.
Okay, all right. So for those of you who stuck around, what do you want to do? Do you want to tell me how terrible that was, or if it meant anything, or?
No, it was not terrible. It's great. I've been part of the Weaving Lab for some time, little time. I started a month or 2 months ago, and it's really nice to understand a bit better how to uneagle the systems.
That's a good way of saying that. Yeah.
For me, I'm the chair of the Florida Food Policy Council, which is a statewide food policy council. And I also am the vice chair of the Suncoast Sierra Club. So I do a lot of intersectional work with food waste, climate change, food justice, food insecurity, and working in the resiliency and sustainability space. So the data and the ability to capture it with the GIS mapping, and for us as a nonprofit, interpreting that with a story map, and GIS allows you to do that, not just capture data, but also tell a story. So I'm trying to learn the different ways to create those, those stories for our members, for me as the chair to be able to articulate to funders, because we need money as a small nonprofit. Racial equity is important to me these days. All of my work is conducted through what I call a JEDI lens, as you all know, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So trying to capture the data in a way that tells a story it's complex. You understand?
It's very complex. Yeah.
So I just sit in and listen and take notes and just try to find ways as a leader, one, to learn as much as I can about ways we can help deliver, whether it's through a food forum, a dialogue, a class. How can we help put people in situations, to get food, to get access to whatever services they need? So I think the data collection with the GIS mapping is key. So yeah, and I mean, that's actually where I started in the beginning was, this is a different kind of data than what you're talking about, but just having an appreciation for how you can tell us, like how data visualization can help you tell a story in ways that just tons of sheer numbers doesn't do. So that was for me, just that storytelling capacity within data was what was actually, I was doing that before I was doing this. That was important. Brian, thoughts? Anything you want to say? Don't feel obliged. You can just shake your head and say, no, I'm not talking to you right now, Christine.
my thing is, I'm not convinced that, or but no, that's not the right word.
You can say that.
I'm not sure that I can convince other people to use this just yet. The group I'm working with may not be at that level, and I maybe ain't being unfair, but sometimes I think with the donut economics, they see all the metrics they have, all the social foundations and all the ecological things, and they think they can use them like traffic signals. That if we tell people where you can't go past, you know, like a speed limit,
Yeah.
everything will work out.
Yeah.
Don't think that's true. I think it's going to take a lot more to be able to put this together, particularly if you're talking about different regions. And the best example I have is with water in California. 80% of the water comes from Northern California. 75% of the water is used in Southern California. That's a big gap. And you have to work out how to make that work together. So that's the thing I'm thinking about right now.
Yeah, and I totally hear I mean, this is because I've done a lot of these maps, and it's a problem even after the map is made. The problem is people are like, okay, I don't, but so what? I don't, you know, and then it kind of peters out because we don't have this insight into what's the need to understand beyond our network horizon.
Right. Yes, I think it's a really important point.
And the value of that. So welcome back.
Rebecca, I'm sorry I hit the wrong button there.
Can we do that?
I was going to say small experiments. Yeah.
Yes. Like Christine put it, safe to fail, I think is the way. You
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
did that. Yeah, which I really
Yeah.
like.
Just the importance of that safe to fail piece is getting more and more crystallized and clear in my head. Like if it's too big, I mean, if it's big enough that it matters, that it's going to hurt something, it's probably too big. It's probably not the experiment you should be. I mean, just as a rule of thumb, it's getting clearer to me how to, how to think about that. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. So, we only have a minute, and I want to just hear from somebody a very like a quick aha. Let's just put them in the chat. How about that? That will mean we can hear from more than one, and we'll do that. We'll give you a minute to do that, and then we'll do. Oh, and I forgot to say. So I'm going to be talking while you're writing. Apologize for that. For those of you who don't know this, we'll stick around for an extra half an hour and have an informal conversation. So if anybody wants to just carry this further, I'll be here. It's not structured, it's just optional. So we'll say goodbye in a minute to everybody and send you off on your way with blessings. And then if you want to stick around and talk further, go into a breakout room with someone you were talking to, whatever. Just don't leave at that point in time. The incredible wisdom of word clouds. I was impressed with some of like some of the things you guys said that I had not thought of. Okay. We're going to do it. So we have a little goodbye ritual for everybody who needs to jump off at the top of the hour, which is all of us who want to do this goodbye ritual, unmute ourselves. And so go ahead and start unmuting yourselves, and then I will count down, and then when I get to 1, we'll just all give each other our love and appreciation and greet and blessings for the rest of the day. And in the midst of that, jump off as you need to. So looks like most of us are ready. So 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much.
everybody. Bye.
Wonderful. Have a nice day.
Thank you.